We are live. It is week 17. All the marbles. And, well, we have some tough decisions. You have some tough decisions. Let's get together. Let's talk it through, starting with Dr. Jene Bramel. Doc, I got to start with Elijah Mitchell because this is the latest breaking news as far as injuries that may be affecting lineup decisions. Now, when we've seen Elijah Mitchell in the past, he's been the man for this offense. Jeff Wilson's a little better. And the talk sounds like maybe he will get as much work as he can tolerate. How much work should we expect that to be today against the Texans?
Well, we don't really know what the original injury was. So if we knew that it was a bruise or an MCL sprain or a little meniscus something or other, we could have a better sense of whether or not his conditioning was there and he'd be able to take his pre-injury workload or not. I think based on what Kyle Shanahan was saying and the fact that Elijah Mitchell seemed like he was improving throughout the week, I think you can expect him to get pretty close to pre-injury workload. I think some of that depends on how effective you think Jeff Wilson was over the past couple of weeks. His first time back, he wasn't all that effective, and I think he kind of improved over the last couple of games, which means I think we're going to see some Jeff Wilson. But I think it's entirely reasonable to expect Mitchell to see around 12 to 15 touches. And if Wilson isn't effective and Mitchell feels fine and his conditioning is there, you could see his pre-injury workload. I don't think we're getting to 30 touches today by any stretch. I don't think we're likely to see 80 to 90% of the snaps. But if he looks good in the first couple of series, it could well be where he gets as much work as he can handle. But what the Niners have said is they're going to keep an eye on his conditioning and mix their other players in if they need to. They've done that in the past when players recover from injury, and sometimes they've give players as much as they can handle. So I feel pretty good about Mitchell today. I'd feel a little bit better if I knew precisely what his injury was, but I think you can put him in lineups without too much concern.
So, Dr. Jene, with Antonio Brown, I know he came out of last week's game. I mean, he had essentially all the targets for Tampa Bay. He winds up either tweaking his ankle at some point during the game or throughout practice. I mean, what are your expectations for Antonio Brown? Do you think he's going to play? Is he working through another injury? I know with the contract incentives, he really has a lot to play for at this point, but should fantasy managers count on that as a reason to put him in their championship lineups?
Yeah, boy, I don't know. Antonio Brown's the toughest call of the weekend for me. It's hard to know. I could tell you a story in which he missed almost 2 months with an injury that was expected to take him but a shorter period of time, which tells you that it was a little bit of a more significant sprain than was maybe originally felt. And players, when they have aggravations of that, especially when their first game action back, you'd expect them to need a little bit of recovery time. Didn't really practice at all this week. The Bucs weren't really very optimistic as the week progressed, and then they listed him questionable. And now we're hearing that maybe there were some doubts all along whether he was going to play. Which would make you think that he's probably not going to be all that effective and productive today. I could also tell you a story in which there's no Chris Godwin. Mike Evans was on the COVID list. Antonio Brown did come back and look effective last week. And the Buccaneers knew that there wasn't going to be anybody on the depth chart other than Antonio Brown. And if they wanted to continue to have any sort of passing offense at all, because we didn't see much from Tyler Johnson, we didn't see much from Scotty Miller in the past, and not rely on the running game only, then there wasn't much sense in putting him out there at all until Saturday to see how he responded to whatever rehab he needed during the week and then decide whether he's ready to go or not. So that would also go with team had some doubts on whether he was ready to play, and then he looked better on Saturday than we expected, and he's got a lot to play for, and we know Brown is effective in short spaces, and he'll be just fine. So I can tell either one of those stories convincingly if you want me to, and I know that's not helpful. I was sort of expecting him to be on the doubtful side of questionable as we came into the weekend, so that wasn't surprising, but that was a fairly optimistic report. The piece of information we just don't have is Bruce Arians was not talking to the media this week, and from the beginning this year, he has been very pretty straightforward with how their players are with injury. We don't have that piece of information. So there wasn't anything particularly pessimistic overnight. I think unless you have another clearly viable option that's going to give you 5 to 6 effective targets, I think you roll with Brown and hope for the best. But it could be a very short day for him as well, depending on exactly what that tweak means from his ankle. So that's as much as I know. I'll give you guys all the information you have to make decisions as possible. But I don't think I've got a strong lean one way or the other.
Doc, does Vic Fangio understand that when you put a player at a position on the COVID list and then you say another player at that position could go on the COVID list, that we're probably going to think we don't have Courtland Sutton for our lineups? Do we have Courtland Sutton for our lineups? Should we play him as if Vic Fangio didn't say anything?
I wish we knew the timing of when teams were doing COVID test. You think they'd want the information as early as possible, but there have been a couple of situations in the last 2 weeks where we've had breaking news at 11 in the afternoon, or sometime in the late morning there, where something has changed. Him being cleared yesterday suggests that he's had a couple of days worth of symptoms. His COVID tests have all been negative, and hopefully that continues to be the case. The nature of these antigen tests are such that if you test negative on day 2 into day 3, you're generally not positive for COVID. But unfortunately, there's so much COVID going around right now that it's, at any point somebody could test positive. So if he's still symptomatic, just like Carson Wentz this morning, they're going to continue to test, and there's one more chance that there might be some issues moving forward. So all of these players, it wasn't just Courtland Sutton. There was a number of them this weekend where you could see things going in a different direction on Saturday or Sunday. So far, so good with Sutton. And if that's the case, looks like he should be able to play without too much conditioning issues, but keep an eye on that all the way up to inactives.
So, Gene, moving back over to at least another East Coast team, the New England Patriots. So, Damian Harris has been battling this hamstring injury for at least a couple weeks, if I'm remembering correctly. But now he has Ramondre Stevenson coming back. Any chance that against the Jaguars, one of the best matchups for, any running back at this point in the season, should we expect Damian Harris to be at full go? Can we see more of a split, I guess, as we have seen throughout some of the season? What are your expectations for Damian Harris with his injury?
I don't think the injury is going to play much of a role for Harris this week. Didn't get a ton of snaps last week. He wasn't high profile, but it was first week back from the hamstring injury. This is the first time in a month, I think, that the Patriots have had pretty much their entire running back room ready to go. Stevenson off the COVID list and seems to be in pretty good condition. Brandon Bolden was taken off the injury report altogether on Thursday, which is something that the Patriots don't tend to do. Shocked me so much that I had to go to the waiver wire to find out whether or not they put him on injured reserve. It's just not something they do. They just mark them as limited and questionable and go through the end of the week. So all three of those players are ready and ready to be used. So I think that Harris's usage and touches today are way more dependent on what you think about Ramondre Stevenson coming back and how the Patriots are going to use him rather than any lingering effects from the hamstring.
All right, Doc. Last time we heard of Jordan Howard stinger, it was one of those injuries that seemed to be not even week to week, but day to day. And then what did it end up being, like 6 weeks, 7 weeks that he was out. Now, he is expected to play, but how reluctant should we be to play him, knowing that this has been a problem for him in the recent past?
I think that's going to be more of a question for you guys than me again. The reason, so stinger injuries are kind of an either or proposition for me. Either the nerve is not significantly harmed and all of the symptoms recover within 3 to 5 minutes, maybe 10 to 15 minutes, and you're pretty much good to go, or the nerve is more irritated than you knew initially, and that becomes a 3 to 4 week process. So it was a little bit unusual that it became 5 to 6 to 7 weeks. I don't know if that was last year or the year before, probably the year before. But once they clear him for contact, which they wouldn't have done unless they thought he was going to be able to play. So the piece of information we didn't really have until overnight this morning was what his Thursday and Friday practice was like. Was it conditioning? Was it reevaluation? Did they actually clear him for contact? It didn't appear from Nick Sirianni's comments that they did. So I had Howard on the doubtful side of questionable as well, because it didn't look like he'd been cleared for contact yet. And if that's the case, knowing his history of stinger issues, not being able to practice on Wednesday kind of suggests that he's in more of that 3 to 4 week time frame than the 15 to 30 minute time frame. So I think this is, again, going to have more to do with, what do you think of Boston Scott? What do you think of Kenny Gainwell? And who and what are the Eagles going to do as far as the game plan? And if they didn't know that he was going to be ready until Friday night into Saturday, Howard may not be much in the game plan at all. So I'd be a little bit leery about him, but it's mostly because of, what are the Eagles going to decide to do with that, 3 running back situation there more than anything else. I don't think there's a significantly high risk of re-injury. There's something there, but not so much where I would avoid him for that reason.
So I'll kick it over to Arizona's backfield now. James Conner, he was called a game time decision, and Cliff Kingsbury was talking about him being GTD. I think it was maybe Tuesday, Wednesday, very early in the week. Any expectations for him to go? And even if he does go, should we even expect for him to be in some sort of split backfield with Chase Edmonds, or do you think he'd be more of in a reserve role for today?
I think if they use him, Arizona has been such this year that their offensive players that they're concerned about, they usually leave them inactive rather than worry about whether or not they're going to aggravate the injury during the game or play a limited role. I'm kind of surprised that Connor's expected to play today. From what the beat writers that saw the media portion of practice on Friday said, they suggested he stretched and didn't do any individual drills at all. Now, veteran players don't necessarily need to do that. They know the game plan, they know the playbook, and they don't need a ton of work. But Connor really hasn't practiced in a couple of weeks, didn't make much progress, and then was ruled out late last week. Didn't seem like he made that much progress this week in terms of, as you said, still being called a game time decision all the way through the end of the week and really not being able to do much in practice at all. So it concerns me there. So much so that if he is active, the issue with Connor is he plays a role around the goal line. So, are you going to get 5 carries and 15 yards and 2 touchdowns? Is that enough? I think that has more impact on what you think of Chase Edmonds than it does on James Conner at this point. I don't think we're getting 10 to 12 James Conner effective touches necessarily, but that's a huge issue for what your expectations for Edmonds are. So I still think this is a chance where we might hear later in the day that Conner is not going to play or he's used very minimally at all. And I wouldn't shy away from Edmonds that much, but we'll see if we get information from Jay Glazer as the rest of the pregame shows roll on this morning.
All right, Gene. Looks like Mike Evans is going to play, but we're getting the dreaded if, but maybe of a limited snap count. Should we listen to the he's going to play part or the limited snap count part when we set our lineups?
Both. I mean, I think that's exactly what's going to happen. Hamstring injury, those are sorts of things that he's played through and played effectively through before. I think he knows how to manage his soft tissue injuries without too much trouble. So I think that's reassuring. But the team really didn't get a chance to look at him until Friday. He's on the COVID list most of the week. We don't know what his conditioning is there. Really hasn't been able to rehab all that much during the week. So I just don't think they know what they have. And it would be, even though he's played through those injuries before, the chances that he's going to see 50 to 60 snaps is really low. Now, maybe there's more going on with Antonio Brown and he's on the pessimistic side, or he takes a hit earlier in the game and isn't able to go because he's just not effective and they have to play through Mike Evans in some form or fashion. But I don't think you see Evans stretching the field. I don't think you see him getting out of his breaks all that explosively. So even if you somehow get 40 to 50 snaps out of Evans, you really have to hope for a couple of good red zone opportunities for him to be productive today. So I'm not optimistic for him at all. I think there's a higher risk of if they're both active, I think there's probably a higher risk of Evans suffering an aggravation and leaving early than there is Brown. So I'd be, unless you have no other options and you're in a TD only league where, a couple of touchdowns might make a difference for you as far as an upside situation and to come from behind you believe you're an underdog, then I don't think I would play Evans today.
One more running back question for me, Dr. Gene. I do not understand. Well, I don't understand the Lions team as a whole. I'm excited for him. I don't understand it. But for DeAndre Swift, what should we make of where he's at right now health-wise? I know Dan Campbell seems to be very excited about having him back. We haven't seen him in, at least a month. And there was also a discussion about, well, he's going to play this week, but then they might shut him down next week. What should we make of this, for Swift? Not even in terms of a workload sense, but health-wise, is he somebody that we should rely on in such a critical moment in the fantasy season?
I don't know how many running backs have a 20 touch expectation today, but I think you can include Swift in that category. They cleared him for contact this week, fully practiced, not listed at all. Dan Campbell said they weren't going to restrict his touches. Deuce Staley said, I'm not putting a governor on him. This is not me. We're going to play him as much as possible. Again, I don't know that he immediately goes back to that 80% of snaps that he was getting in those last couple of weeks before his injury. But there was plenty of rumors that they were going to take extra care with him. And I don't think they'd put him on the field if they didn't feel like he was ready for contact. Also, the Lions have been playing hard over these last 2 or 3 weeks. And it looks like that team as a whole has something to play for. The other issue here is they don't really have any wide receivers. Khalif Raymond is out. Josh Reynolds is out. There's really not a lot going on there. So, even if you would think that you could see that one of two ways: either the Lions aren't going to run many snaps at all because they're not going to be able to sustain offense, or even though Craig Reynolds is there and was effective and Jamal Williams is back, if they run 50 offensive snaps and 35 of them are running back touches, you could easily still see DeAndre Swift get 20, and he's going to be involved in the passing game probably. So I would not shy away from playing him. Worry about week 18 and week 18. It really looks like this week they're planning on relying on him, and there's a relatively low risk for setback at this point because they've been so careful with him so far.
Gene, should I play Tyler Huntley or Aaron Rodgers?
Sure. That's not a question y'all want to be asking me.
What about one of Tyler Huntley's main targets? Yeah, well, I'm gonna actually. I said that so Chris has like 30 minutes to think about it before he has to tell me what to do.
Well, you're making me think it's a much more interesting question, and I do understand that Tyler Huntley has been a very effective play recently, but I think I have a hard time
for all the marbles. What about one of Huntley's main targets, Marquis Brown?
Yeah, so that's the same question as Courtland Sutton, right? So I think all of these players, because they're getting antigen tests, might test negative on day one and positive on day 2 or 3. So every player that's listed with an illness, there's so many things circulating out right now. It's not just COVID, but you have to wonder whether or not the morning of game day, if they're still symptomatic and get another test, whether or not what was negative becomes positive and there's an issue. So you just hope that you have enough information out there. I don't know that Marquise Brown has been all of that effective with Tyler Huntley. They're really not throwing the ball downfield that much. They're using Mark Andrews nearly exclusively in the middle of the field at this point, and Rashad Bateman's been more involved. So I think that's, again, a question for how do you feel like the Ravens offense is going to function with or without Brown and make a decision there. As of now, it looks like he's going to play, and there really shouldn't be that much in the way of conditioning issues, at least based on what we've seen so far. There wasn't anything in the local media that suggested, even though this wasn't COVID, that there were some issues going forward that he might be limited on Sunday just due to conditioning problems.
Just since we're not going to be doing the show next week, Dr. Gene, for folks that might be wondering, Cam Akers, will he be playing at all next week? Would you expect him to be playing?
I don't know what to expect with Cam Akers. He is going to be an outlier in the same sense that Adrian Peterson was an outlier from his ACL tear 5, 7, 8 years ago. I don't know. I'm getting older and older by the day, it seems like. But, looking at him in drills, he looks like he's moving well. He doesn't look to be favoring that side at all. Whether or not he can be as explosive in game situations at live game speed is another question. I think we are going to see him play next week. The Rams are going to want to know what he looks like in game action before deciding how they're going to use, Michelle and Akers together come playoff time. So they're going to need to see what he looks like. So I think they're doing the right thing by taking care and giving him as much conditioning and football drills as possible before they put him in game action. But I think you're probably going to see him for 5 to 10 snaps and maybe 5 to 10 plus touches next week, so they know what's what.
If you want to know what Dr. Jene Bramel looks like in game action, well, you just tune in to the YouTube channel. You subscribe to Football Guys, and you get all the wisdom, all the goodness. Happy New Year, Gene.
Thank you. Looking forward to 2022 for sure. Yeah. Guys, enjoy your day. Thanks, y'all.
You too.
All right, Chris, I'm going to warn you, man. These are hard choices. Like when it's week 17, it's not easy. It's not easy. Oh, yeah. But we take the weight, right? That's what we're here for. So let's. We had questions starting at 8:34 Central, 9:34 Eastern this morning. Let's get to it. Let's knock these out. We're not going to do general floofy stuff. We're going to give the people what they want, the answers.
Let's go.
The rising, Dak or Stafford?
No, I would probably lean more towards Dak at this point. I think in this matchup between both of the teams, if I'm remembering correctly, from a pace standpoint, both the Cowboys and the Cardinals are playing like at a fairly fast rate. We just saw, I'm not expecting a blow-up game like what Dak did against Washington, but you could also see a same scenario where from a passing perspective, Dak can at least hit, let's say something above his typical floor of let's say 200 and 2 touchdowns, because all of his receivers are in good spots, I think, at this point. If you're not, from CD to Amari to Michael Gallup, if Zeke is also catching touchdowns like he did against Washington, I think all of his pass catchers are in play. Dalton Schultz as well. You're talking about 4 or 5 different pass catchers that can get into the end zone for the Cowboys. So even though I know that everybody from Matthew Stafford to Odell Beckham are campaigning for Cooper Kupp to get to his 2K mark, I think very much so the weapons for Dallas lend itself more to Dak having the bigger day. So I lean Dak at that point.
Yeah, I'd go Dak too. If you were to say who has a better chance of throwing 5 touchdowns today, it might be Stafford. It's the Baltimore matchup, right? The Baltimore matchup is going to reel you in. And there's a lot of these that I'm going to say, I'm not going to talk you out of the other choice. I'm not going to talk you out of playing Stafford. There's no quarterback choice where I would say maybe even Josh Allen. I don't know. But I think Dak at home against Arizona. All right, Zach, I'm going to take a shot here. Zach Wojtowicz, 0.5 PPR, slight underdog. Love the extra information. Jarrett Patterson, who's now in line to start for the football team today, running back. Devonta Smith, who, is it a Goddard week? Is it a Smith week
Right.
going up against in that same game?
Mhm.
Jarvis Landry in maybe Ben Roethlisberger's swan song at Heinz Field. And then Courtland Sutton, who we talked about for the first time I can remember. He doesn't have a lot of company as long as he actually plays.
I can't. Yeah, I can't do anything with Denver's offense at this point. From
Ooh.
COVID to Drew Lock, like no, I can't recommend that. Devonta Smith actually doesn't sound all too bad, because even when we saw in their game last week against the Giants, he was like part of that offensive game plan where if Jalen Hurts did roll out and throw a pass, I mean, even though there was one to the end zone where Dallas Goedert was essentially standing there by himself, I mean, Devonta Smith was one of the ones that he was giving some of those 50-50 balls, passes across the middle, and getting just the general majority of the target share. So I do think Devonta Smith probably has like the safest floor out of all of them. Of course, I mean, just like you mentioned, you can make the case for Courtland Sutton having at least the same floor in terms of opportunity, but just that whole game environment. If I'm remembering correctly, they're only projected for maybe like 2 touchdowns, if I'm remembering right. So from a team total perspective, I can't recommend anybody from the Broncos at this point, maybe outside of the running backs. So no, I would lean more towards Devonta Smith at this point. But yeah, the others.
And what about the second one? So, and the second one out of Sutton, Landry, and Jarrett Patterson.
Landry, I mean, being attached to Baker Mayfield at this point, I guess just because the targets that he gets, like those interior, shorter A-dot targets, at least relative to Donovan Peoples-Jones, I mean, sure, I guess I can kind of see that happening, but it's again, that's another one of those game environments. Like overall, I forget what the team total is, but for that entire game. But it can't be one one that we can expect to see a lot of fantasy points like being scored in. So outside of maybe Najee Harris, Deontay Johnson on the flip side of that ball, the flip side of the ball, I can't recommend them at this point.
So if you had to check one next to Patterson, Jarrett Patterson, Sutton, and Landry, you have to
Landry. I guess Landry.
Because I mean, it reflects the difficulty decision, not necessarily because they're so attractive. And and you're right about Sutton and Drew Lock. I would go with Sutton as the second one only because if Drew Lock can do one thing, he can throw up a prayer, and Sutton can come down with it. But the reality is none of these are attractive starts. All of these, or maybe at least some of them, are attractive starts. Champion Walker, Kyler Murray, Trey Lance, or Tyler Huntley.
Tyler Huntley. I could, well, I guess, and we should have talked to Dr. Jene about this a bit more, just because of players coming back from the COVID list and what their general outlook is, because we've seen from, who is it? Tyreek Hill this past week. I remember him talking after the game saying, I think, or it was either him or Patrick Mahomes saying that he was essentially winded throughout most of the game, unable to do the typical normal Tyreek Hill things like out there on the field, essentially uses a decoy throughout most of it. But if that's the same case for Tyler Huntley, is that rushing going to be there along with the passing? Because he was doing a pretty decent facsimile of Lamar Jackson in most of his starts that we've seen so far this season. So if that's not going to be there, especially against the Rams, and we're just relying on his passing acumen, it becomes a much tougher sell for me at that point. So while I do lean Tyler Huntley, I think the concern for his health at this point, like with him coming off the COVID list, is a fair one at this point. So I do still lean Huntley. Yeah,
Huntley, I think, again, Huntley probably has the best chance of a 35 or 40 point game. So if one of your parameters is a somewhat large underdog, I think Huntley's there. And by the way, spoiler alert, I'm going to go Huntley over Rodgers anyway, but I think I know what you're going to tell me. But I would also give a nudge here if it's an even matchup, or if you're the favorite, to Kyler Murray. Murray and Huntley have similar outlooks in so much that they're probably going to have to scuffle in a game that they're trailing.
Oh, yeah.
And the concern in a game like that is, hey, if Dallas starts stringing together some 10, 12 play drives, Murray's going to have a lesser opportunity. Same thing with Huntley and Sony Michel. Speaking of Sony Michel for Champion Walker, one running back has to sit.
Okay.
Edmonds, Michel, Eckler, and Ronald Jones.
I'd say out of that entire group, let's see, maybe Michel. I mean, out of all the things that Baltimore has done well on defense, I'd say their rush defense has been fairly decent. So out of all of those guys, because with Chase Edmonds, while I don't think that his like rushing floor is going to be all that high, especially against Dallas's front, but outside of, Zach Ertz, Rondale Moore's coming into this game fairly banged up if he's going to play at all. So
Right.
for those shorter targets that we would typically see go to Rondale Moore, if Zach Ertz isn't getting them and James Conner isn't going to play, which we talked about earlier, I mean, or the
Right.
possibility still exists of him not playing, who's going to get some of those dump off targets? I mean, that would most likely go towards Chase Edmonds. So from a PPR perspective, I could see Chase Edmonds catching 6, 7, 8 balls like in this game. So
Right.
at the very least, I think that's where he gets most of his fantasy production from. So, which I can't say the same for Ronald Jones. Ronald Jones is going to get maybe 2 to 3 targets. Now, the efficiency on the ground is going to be there because they're playing the Jets, and Tampa Bay will be able to do whatever they want. But overall, I think out of all that group, I think Michelle probably has the, I don't know, what's the best way to characterize it? Probably he does have a safe floor, but from a ceiling perspective, I just don't see it as compared to the other guys.
Yeah, I think that Eckler, we didn't mention Eckler because he's obviously in. Edmonds, you mentioned the PPR outlook for him, and I know Connor didn't play last week, but he's the passing down back, and in a game you expect him to trade. I think he's in. And it does come down to Michelle or Jones. And briefly, and I think here's my worry about Jones, is that Bruce Arians, before he was on media blackout, gushing about Keyshawn Vaughn.
Yeah, I heard that.
And he was saying we see him as a 3-down back. Ronald Jones is always prone to stub his toe on some assignment and see the bench. And if Tampa does get out to a big league, I wonder if it is Keyshawn Vaughn time. So it is really a coin flip, because with Michelle, I think what you need are the short touchdowns, and they might be there, right? So it's like, do Odell Beckham and Van Jefferson catch long touchdowns, or Cooper Kupp, or does Baltimore commit pass interference in the end zone? You know?
Right. Yeah.
And that could be the difference between whether the correct answer is Michelle or Jones. Gun to my head, that's what week 17 is, right? I would probably bench Jones, but I won't talk you out of benching Michelle. Edmonds and Eckler should be in. Okay. Mel Johnson needs 1.5 PPR. Dante Foreman, Amir Abdullah, Jonathan Williams. This is one I think that is a little bit more of a layup.
Ooh, wow. So see, who are the 3 again?
Dante Foreman, Amir Abdullah, Jonathan Williams, who's going to be like the number 2 or 1A for the football team, and a 0.5 PPR.
No, I think I would lean more towards either the first 2, like Donta Foreman and Amir Abdullah. It's just very difficult, especially against the Eagles front 7, to see either him or Jared Patterson like having much success on the ground. And essentially that entire offense, like for Washington, I can't recommend
stay away.
Just stay away. I've heard folks talking about like say Jonathan Bates and like any of those, like just
even McLaurin.
It's very tough.
Terry is scary in your lineup.
So 100%. So I would take either of the 2, even though Miami's rush D has been okay. But if Donta Foreman is still also mixing in as a pass catcher as well, because we've seen all 3 of them, from him to McNichols, they've all continued to get targets. So I can see Foreman also seeing like at least a decent share of the rushing attempts along with some targets as well.
Yeah, I think it's Foreman pretty clearly here. The best chance at 15 touches, the best chance at a rushing touch, the best chance at 20 touches. Mel Johnson also asks, and this one, if that one was a layup, this one's a slam dunk, I think. Gerald Everett or Evan Ingram?
Oh, Gerald Everett.
Yeah.
I mean,
you don't want to hitch any of your hopes to the Giants.
Yeah, to Jake Fromm. I mean, that's who you want to hitch.
Or Mike Glennon, or back to Jake Fromm. Or, when your quarterback platoon is Fromm and Glennon, that's a sad place to be.
Yes.
Okay, back to Champion Walker. Non-PPR, you got to bench one.
Okay.
Dalvin Cook, Najee Harris, Sony Michel, Chase Edmonds. A little different optics there, non-PPR for Edmonds.
Oh, with non-PPR? Ooh, yeah, then I think he would probably be the easiest one to sit at this point.
Assuming Connor is active. Yeah, I think so. Yeah. Quarterback, this is tough. Justin Herbert, who's facing Denver, but at home. Trey Lance, who we haven't really dug into, but we know the story here. He's going to start against the Texans. And of course, old Tyler Huntley. Herbert, Lance, or Huntley?
Herbert. Yeah, I mean, if I'm remembering correctly, I think Denver's defense is also going to be missing a couple of key players as well because of COVID. So with Herbert, I mean, in what I would expect to be more of a bounce back spot after they essentially imploded against the Texans last week. So I would consider Herbert to be the guy. I mean, because we were just talking about Eckler being a no-brainer start against Denver. I would also consider the entire Chargers offense to be at least all the pieces to be no-brainer starts. I mean, maybe minus like Mike Williams, but we weren't expecting a ton from him to begin with. But even all the way down to guys like Steven Anderson, who's now going to be in a featured role with Jared Cook on the COVID list, on a Parham, on IR. So yeah, I think all of the Chargers offense, like if you're talking about anybody on LA's squad at this point, yeah, they'd be in my starting roster for sure.
Yeah, you're right to point out Denver's losses on the defensive side. And just in general, Denver seeming like a morose team right now, because in the first matchup, Denver actually controlled it. It was in Denver, 28-13, but that might not be the case this week. But yeah, I think when Mike Williams was clear to play this week, that really made Herbert an easier call. I won't talk you out of Huntley here. Lance could end up being the right answer, but he just doesn't have the track record right now to put him in.
Yeah.
Mel Johnson, and this gets to the FFWX part of your handle. First, he says he has concerns about the weather in Seattle. And why? Because he has to decide in a 0.5 PPR between Tyler Lockett, who is another player who said coming back off the COVID list was no walk in the park. He said he lost 8 pounds or something like that. So we got Tyler Lockett. And then we have Van Jefferson against the all-you-can-eat buffet that is the Baltimore secondary.
I do like Tyler Lockett this week, assuming he's been able to get in at least like limited to full practice throughout the week, which I believe is the case, or else I would assume that Dr. Gene would have mentioned that at some point. So if his health is at least back to something of a baseline, I remember seeing the same reports about him battling some issues with COVID. No, I would start him this week over Van Jefferson. I do, because at least from a ceiling perspective, I mean, Van Jefferson has been catching downfield targets for touchdowns. Tyler Lockett's been doing the exact same thing. And is going to be rain. It's going to be fairly cold in Seattle today. I took a look at the weather report earlier this morning. But no, the precipitation rate isn't going to be high enough to really impact like either the team's like intent in terms of how often Russell Wilson is passing, how deep he's going to be passing, so on and so forth. So my only concern at this point is how they're going to treat Russell Wilson with the way that the entire team has been kind of sounding over the past like week or so. But other than that, I don't think the weather is going to change any of that now.
Yeah, I think I'd go with Lockett there. I won't talk anybody out of Van Jefferson or Odell Beckham. In a like if you want to play those guys, I'm not going to say that's crazy. And even playing them over players who have a much better recent track record coming in to this week. Dan Matachero again, he has Huntley, Taysom Hill, or Lance. I think that's pretty clearly Huntley. But he has one. We were talking about Scary Terry McLaurin. It's a full PPR. Terry McLaurin or Cordero Patterson.
Ooh, actually, I don't mind Cordero Patterson.
Right.
But it's kind of weird because the way that Atlanta's been using Patterson more on base downs versus getting him more of the more targets like out in space over the past few weeks, I guess that does lend itself to a little bit more concern. But if we're talking about upside, we're talking about who can wind up finding the paint in either of their respective matchups. It has to be Cordero Patterson or McLaurin.
I think that's a sentimental one too. I get it. If you just, when you look over your lineup and Patterson's done so much to get you there, and it's Cordero Patterson. He's just an awesome dude. I think more people are noticing that. There's a lot more clips and things circulating around. Cordero Patterson's just an awesome guy. I loved earlier this year when they asked him about playing running back and wide receiver. He's like, well, my mom worked 4 jobs. So that I could have the opportunities. I can do this. I'm going with Cordero Patterson there. Like you said, it's just easier to picture him having a big game. Buffalo could run away with this one, but the soft underbelly of their defense is also the run defense, and that's what he'll get to attack. Okay, this is one. Ryan Kraft asked a question, Chris, and I feel like if I come back to it in 5 minutes, I'm going to answer something different. And I come back to it in 10 minutes, I'm going to answer something different.
All right.
You got to bench one out of Odell Beckham, Christian Kirk. This is a full PPR. Odell Beckham, Christian Kirk, Tyler Lockett, and Amon-Ra St. Brown.
Ooh. So Odell Beckham, Christian Kirk, Tyler Lockett, or Amon-Ra.
Right?
Man, maybe. Wow. I would say the guy that has I want to say Amon-Ra because his name sticks out just because he's attached to Tim Boyle, but he wasn't that bad last week either. So I can't really say that. Maybe Odell Beckham. I guess if I was going to throw out any of them, just because at this point, if we're talking about Cooper Kupp and all of the accolades associated with him, or at least where he's heading towards, we already talked about Van Jefferson being the guy to catch some of the downfield targets. We haven't even talked about the fact that it could be Tyler Higbee also still getting involved as a pass catcher. So, I mean, from all of that, I would say Odell Beckham is just kind of in the mix where we can at least talk ourselves into, with the other guys, them being the focal points of their respective offenses. Christian Kirk being the focal point of at least one of the primary focal points of Arizona's offense. Amon-Ra being the focal point of his offense. So I think out of all of those guys, I think Odell Beckham is one of the guys that you can probably label as being in the mix versus being one of the primary targets in his. So I would say he'd be the one to sit.
Yeah, this one's so tough because I believe that you have two big variance plays here in Lockett and Beckham, and then you have two reasonably high floor plays, but maybe with a low ceiling. Now, granted, with Amon-Ra St. Brown, like you said, he was fine last week. Now, that was up without DeAndre Swift out there, but it's also
True.
Seattle's defense.
Yeah.
Dan Campbell's been calling the plays there, by the way, and I think the offense actually looked better. I would be inclined to go with Kirk and Amon-Ra St. Brown. I know you're probably pocketing 10 to 12 PPR points at a minimum there.
Yeah.
And then you kind of flip a coin here. I think on the OBJ side, it's Baltimore. And no one should be shocked if he has a 60 or 70 yard touchdown. But on the Lockett side, it's Detroit. So it's like, I don't know. I mean, and depending how frisky you are, or if you were a big underdog, I would say maybe I would bench Amon-Ra St. Brown.
Right.
Because he's the one. If anybody's going to really bottom out in a way that is foreseeable, I mean, Tim Boyle was okay last week. It was a bit surprising. Maybe this week with an even easier target in DeAndre Swift. These are tough, but this is why they pay us the big bucks. But one of the variance plays, Beckham or Lockett, I think is the answer there. Okay, we're getting permutations on these quarterback questions. John Smith, Matthew Stafford or Kyler Murray?
Stafford. I mean, just a better overall game environment for Stafford, I believe, at this point. I mean, from the defensive matchup to the players that he's going to be passing the ball to. Whereas with Kyler Murray, we've seen just how far of a step they've had to take back without DeAndre Hopkins in the lineup. I mean, are we really expecting? We can kind of think about Van Jefferson having a big day, Odell Beckham catching a long touchdown, like you just said, Cooper Kupp. Obviously, he's in a tier of his own. But can we see the same outcomes for any of the Cardinals pass catchers? And I can't talk myself into Christian Kirk having a day like any of the Rams pass catchers. Zach Ertz. I mean, just like none of them have the same type of outlook for them. So other than Kyler Murray, if he's going to run for like a 50-yard touchdown, or at least two of those, I mean, while it's entirely possible, we haven't seen that in a number of weeks. So outside of that, I would put it at Stafford for sure.
Yeah, again, and scoring system matters in this one. John didn't say scoring system except full PPR. In a 6-point pass touchdown league, in a point per 20 pass yards, in leagues where you get 300-yard passing game bonus, long touchdown bonuses, all these things tilt you towards Stafford. But if you're more at the 4-point pass touchdown, point per 25 pass yards, then Murray and that running ability. It's funny because you said 2 touchdowns. Sam Darnold did that in a garbage time performance against Dallas earlier this year. So it's one of those things, and this is where fantasy football is just a cruel mistress, is that you could correctly predict that Dallas is going to dominate, just throttle Arizona, but that could actually create the conditions for Murray to put up 25 fantasy points just in the second half, because just like last week, Dallas gets out to a big lead on them. All right, this one, this is another one with a Dallas angle. I don't feel like this one is this tough, but I'm curious what you say. Rob Gronkowski or Dalton Schultz?
Rob Gronkowski.
Yes. And I love the no hesitation.
Without too much hesitation. No, because if we're just looking at the other pass catchers, Mike Evans, while I know he's just like 100 and some odd yards away from getting his another 1,000-yard season from him. But if do have injury concerns for Mike Evans, we do have injury concerns for Antonio Brown. We have, Rojo is almost a 0 in the passing game. Really, who else is Tom Brady going to be passing the ball to like today? And I know it's the Jets, but it's not like Tom Brady is one to, once they get up, take his foot off the gas. He's going to still be out there with probably like 6 minutes left in the fourth quarter, still slinging it. And I think Rob Gronkowski is going to be one that's out there with him. Whereas with Dalton Schultz, he's going to be more of in the mix. He's like, just like we were talking about Odell Beckham, he's in the mix with Amari Cooper, CeeDee Lamb, Michael Gallup, Ezekiel Elliott. So while he has been prone to having good games and been involved in the passing tree, like for Dak Prescott, it's just more of a in the mix type of guy where Rob Gronkowski is a larger part of his respective offense.
Yeah, if you're looking for that 8-1-22 touchdown game, That's well within his range of outcomes. All right,
Sure.
let's go to lightning round here, and just do answers to see how many of these we can get to, because we still haven't even gotten to the people who ask questions since we started going live here.
Yeah.
Okay, Dan Manichero, Miami or Buffalo defense?
Buffalo.
Yeah, I agree with that one, just because of the matchup. Johnny Doe, Najee Harris or David Montgomery?
David Montgomery.
Yeah, I agree there too, because I'm a neurotic Steelers fan. Patriots or Packers defense?
Packers.
That's tough. Yeah, I'm just like, you can't really go wrong, right? Yeah. I mean, Packers against Sean Mannion, Patriots against Trevor Lawrence. How could you go wrong? I would probably go Patriots, but Packers at Lambeau is basically as good as the Patriots. It's a whole different entity. Champion Walker, it's a good kicker question here. Folk or Tyler Bass or the Money Badger, Michael Badgley?
Folk. I do think that, Folk. Yeah.
It's Mac Jones. They're probably going to kick 5 field goals.
Yep.
Let's see. Barry Hickthyer. Sony Michelle or Boston Scott? We haven't got a Boston Scott question yet.
Sony Michelle.
Yeah, it's still Sony Michelle. Bench 1 out of Jalen Waddle, Deontay Johnson, Amari Cooper, and Gabriel Davis. We didn't talk about this with Dr. Gene. Emmanuel Sanders trending towards doubtful.
Bench 1.
Yeah.
Gabriel Davis.
Yeah, I think it's still Davis. I think it's still definitely got to be Davis. C-Bus Clones, standard scoring and their favorite, 10 to 15 point favorite, Mike Williams or Van Jefferson?
Van Jefferson.
Yeah, that's Van Jefferson. But just Williams doesn't give you that fear of missing out right now. Sony Michelle or Ronald Jones?
Sony.
Yeah, I mean, they have similar outlooks, and Sony doesn't have someone hovering like Keyshawn Vaughn, and he also doesn't shoot himself in the foot like Ronald Jones.
Yeah.
Bill Stimson, Devin Singletary, Chase Edmonds, Darrell Williams, pick 2.
Darrell Williams, and if it's PPR, Darrell Williams and Chase Edmonds.
Right. And if it's 0.5 or non-PPR, I think that would give Singletary the edge over Edmonds. And I'm okay with Singletary and Williams here also. Williams is one of those plays where it's difficult to be overly optimistic about him, but at the same time, well, see, this gets too close. This is like too close to home, right? With Kansas City. I was driving through Cincinnati yesterday, and they had up on the billboard that there were still tickets available. Why are you sitting here on this feed with me right now? Just go sit up in the top row,
right?
And
it is a little cold outside, but come on.
Yeah. John Thompson, Mike Evans, if active, Tyler Boyd, or Braxton Berrios. He has to bench one of those.
Bench one. Bench Berrios.
Ooh, yeah, and Berrios is such a tough call with Jamison Crowder likely out, because Berrios, it's kind of like we talked about with the Amon-Ra St. Brown and Christian Kirk. What did Kirk have last week? Like 748. That sounds like a Braxton Berrios line against Tampa. Tyler Boyd, I like Tyler Boyd today because Tyler Boyd, he's the struggle target, right? If things get tough, tighter, that's who Joe Burrow is going to look to.
Him and Uzomah. Yeah, I think those are the two.
There's your tight end streamer. And I would actually, based on what Dr. Gene said, I would probably bench Mike Evans. I'll probably bench Mike Evans.
Yeah.
I think it's Evans or Berrios. I mean, it's like, really, I'm going to bench Mike Evans for Braxton Berrios, but we have to have context here. Brittany Castillo won for the last flex spot. Saquon Barkley is 0.5 PPR. Saquon Barkley, Jordan Howard, Jarrett Patterson, or Cole Beasley.
Cole Beasley. Although I guess my concern though is players coming off the COVID list, which is, and since we haven't seen a lot from or heard a lot from him since he was activated, I think he's the one that I'd be concerned about. But at the same time, he has the highest floor, I think, out of all those guys.
Yeah. Notice, and I agree. I would agree with this. I don't want to put words in your mouth. No consideration for Saquon Barkley. It's the Giants. Watch, this is the week he busts the 80-yard touchdown. I would actually, my answer for this one was Jordan Howard and Prey. Just because I do think I do think with Howard, if his shoulder, if he doesn't take a hit on the wrong spot on his shoulder, you could see him get 18, 20 carries in this one. It's one of the reasons why
is huge.
Right. Yeah. Right. Well, I mean, when the choice is, and it's your last flex spot. So come on, Brittany, let's bring this home. But and this is another reason you don't like Patterson or you don't like Terry McLaurin this week, is that the Eagles will be perfectly fine to boa constrictor this game and just run the ball like 45 times and barely give the ball back.
Yeah.
Rob Monticelli, this one's tough. Rob is so loyal, Rob, and I hope we can make the right call for you. PPR, AJ Dillon or Van Jefferson?
Oh, he messaged me about this one earlier, and I need to get back to him on it. So I'm glad he asked to hear.
Yeah.
I lean AJ Dillon.
Yeah.
That's where I think that's my lean in this one.
I have a feeling this is going to be one where either choice is good. But A.J. Dillon, when Kirk Cousins was declared out, boy, does that make A.J. Dillon seem like an attractive play. Would not be shocking to see him, like we talked about just a second ago with Jordan Howard, to see him get to 18 or 20 carries, maybe a couple touchdowns, maybe that classic Derrick Henry-esque 50-yard touchdown run just to ice this game in the second half.
Mm-hmm.
By the way, look who is here at the Open.
Hey,
Troy King. Yeah, what's up, Troy? 8 in a row? Can they make it 8 in a row? You got to be rooting for the Dolphins to run the table here. Let's get a couple more in before we say adieu. And I'll be doing my best on Twitter to answer as many questions as I can. Sorry, and it's wonderful that we had enough people. We're up to 373 in week 17 in the new year 2022 that we weren't even able to get to questions that were asked while we were actually live. But the early bird gets that worm. Steve Stallings, get a couple more of these in for people that did get in after 10 a.m. Eastern. Trey Lance. We haven't really had one we had to think about Trey Lance. Maybe is this the one, Trey Lance or Russell Wilson?
Oh, man. I'll say Trey Lance. If you need
the fun play.
Yeah. If you need the points, if you think you might be behind your matchup, I think Trey Lance offers the greater ceiling than Russell Wilson.
I mean, Wilson has the Detroit matchup, and there's maybe some sort of sentimental thing going on there with him talking about it maybe being his last game, not wanting it to be his last game. But Trey Lance, I think, gives you that 6 to 8 point floor as a runner, and probably that translates to a 15-point floor. But I think you could see a very high ceiling here that I just don't see. Again, there's not that fear of missing out with Russell Wilson right now. Rafael Ortiz, we haven't got a chance to do it. Eli Mitchell, Darrell Williams, or Elijah Mitchell.
If he's active, I would go with Elijah Mitchell.
Yeah, I think that I have to update my projections to reflect this, but I think after Dr. Gene gave Elijah Mitchell the vote of confidence and seeing the way that San Francisco has used him and knowing that the San Francisco running game is going to be the face forward with Trey Lance. I mean, what's fun about Trey Lance being out there for this running game is the defense has to play 11 on 11 football. Yes. And and let's see if there's anybody. Let's see. I'm just scanning through here. A lot of these, the nice thing is because it's the same question, same people, players, we've in some ways at least given folks some input. We haven't talked about Rashad Penny yet. Bob Stone says 2.5 PPR. Elijah Mitchell, Devin Singletary, Rashad Penny.
Mitchell and Penny, I think, are the two that I would go with.
Yeah, the half PPR. And Singletary, I mean, I love that he's come on to be someone that, we're thinking about in these questions at this point. But there's not necessarily that fear of missing out there. The big ceiling that Mitchell has shown and Penny have shown this year. You have any questions? So it's Huntley over Rodgers. I'm not crazy.
No, I don't think you're crazy. I've got too much start your studs, that sort of mantra that's still like echoing in my head. But at the same time, who gives you the higher ceiling at this point? And I think if the concerns for his health aren't as great for Huntley coming off the COVID list, then you have to think that Huntley can provide you a higher ceiling than Aaron Rodgers. Even if weather wasn't a factor going up against Sean Mannion, like how do we expect that game environment to be? Can't you just see a scenario where the Green Bay has done essentially all of their damage in the first half or 3 quarters, and they just like ride out A.J. Dillon or Aaron Jones to the end of the game, and then that's just all she wrote? So I can really see like 200 yards and 2 touchdowns would be about the max I would see for Aaron Rodgers today. Where with Huntley, he's going to get pushed into so much more.
I was on the fence until Kirk Cousins ended up on the COVID list, and then that made
it's
a decision for me. And just to put it in the terms you did, Tyler Huntley has been a stud. So, I mean, in some ways, you are starting your studs when you start him. Anything you want to toss up to me or the crowd, other than prayers for the Bengals? Hey, if the Bengals can win today, they should entertain. If you can beat Kansas City, this Kansas City team right now, then you can win the Super Bowl.
Yeah, that's the one matchup, or at least that's the game that I'm still trying to figure out. And does everybody think that Joe Burrow is still a good start from a fantasy perspective today? I haven't seen any questions about him, just because I think the other guys that most folks are talking about.
Yeah,
but I do think that the way that Steve Spagnuolo has been calling defense, I just think there might be some issues for Joe Burrow and that offensive line today. So I'm just wondering how good of a start he's going to be today, even from not just a real life perspective, but from a fantasy perspective as well. And then how that translates to the rest of the offense, from Chase to Higgins to Boyd, so on and so forth. So I think that's kind of where my concern lies with not just being a Bengals fan, but just from that overall game environment, because everybody's going to want to play that game from DFS to season long or whatever. So that's just, I'm trying to figure out how to evaluate that game.
Yeah, and I think the angle we had with Tyler Boyd, I think, is a good one. But the good news is for Cincinnati, it seems like the pattern has been, Chris, as soon as they peak as a team, the next week they trip and fall on their face. Yeah. But I think that knowing that it's Kansas City this week and knowing the gods can be cruel. If the Bengals lose this week and lose to the Browns next week, and the Steelers beat the Browns tomorrow night and beat the Ravens, the Steelers will win the division and the Bengals will likely stay home. Right. So the Bengals still have to win a game, and the Browns it's never a given. So they should have a sense of urgency in this game. They should be going into this game, Chris, prepared as if they lose this game, they're going to miss the playoffs. I mean, just from a psychological standpoint, right? Feel like this is a must-win game. That you cannot go into this game thinking, well, we could afford to lose this game because we can still win next week. No. Nothing is a given in the NFL. Nothing is a given in fantasy football as we hit 400 here in the closing seconds. I wish I didn't have so much to do, folks, and we could just hang out all morning. Happy New Year, everybody. It is a wonderful thing. Listen, I got to tell you, folks, and this is how much I love Gene, how much I love Chris, and how much I love you all, because I was on the road until 5 o'clock this morning, driving back from a wonderful winter family vacation. Hope everybody got to have time spent with loved ones, with the people you like to be with in safe fashion this week. And of course, I was going to get up here, and look who's come to join us here right at the end. Come on.
Where is she?
Well, she's, I mentioned Joe Burrow. I mentioned the Bengals.
And here she comes.
Yeah, here. Where are you at?
Look at her.
There's Judy. Hi, Judy. I'm telling you, folks, it's a very special thing. It's like seeing Bigfoot, if you get to see. And she does have pretty big paws. She's like a snow leopard. It's just wonderful. This is as Chris mentioned, this will be our last Sunday morning start sit. But you can hit me for all of those side pots and all those things as we get up to week 18. Cecil and I will be doing a preview. We'll be doing a recap of the games tonight. Of course, we'll have projections, all kinds of all the suite of things that you're used to for week 18. But right now, it's time to concentrate on week 17 and bring home the hardware. Do it for us. Do it for Football Guys, because you're so classy.